At the beginning of 178 AD, the Roman Empire does not face a new year of war with the enthusiasm of those awaiting a victory, but with the tired caution of those who have learned to distrust any truce. On the Danube front, time seems to have thickened. The seasons pass, the legions march, fight, retreat and move forward, but peace does not arrive. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, has been away from Rome for years now, immersed in a war that he did not seek and which he cannot afford to lose. 178 AD opens like this, as a year that inherits all the weight of the previous one. Fallen men, devastated provinces, fragile alliances, and an army that must continue to fight despite knowing that every success is temporary. To really understand what is happening in this year, we need to stop for a moment and look back at the end of 177 AD, when the Marcomannic War was no longer a sudden crisis but a structural condition of the Danube border, a reality with which Rome had to live. At the end of 177 AD, the military situation along the Danube was far from resolved. After years of incursions, counteroffensives, and punitive campaigns, the empire recovered part of the lost control, but did not break the offensive capacity of the Germanic and Sarmatian peoples. Marcomanni and Quadi, although hit hard, were not destroyed. Their tribal structures are elastic, capable of absorbing defeats and recomposing themselves. The sources suggest an unstable front, where neither of the two contenders can truly claim to be in control of the situation. The Romans have rebuilt and strengthened the defenses along the river, but they know well that the Danube is not an insurmountable barrier. In winter it freezes, in summer it is crossed with improvised boats, and above all it is not enough to control the waterway if the populations beyond the border remain hostile and desperate. The year 177 ended with military operations that re-established a partial Roman initiative. Marcus Aurelius, who personally returned to the front after a period of absence, had imposed a more rigid line of command and a less defensive strategy. The legions had conducted punitive expeditions into enemy territory, destroying villages, capturing prisoners, forcing some communities to surrender. But these actions, although immediately effective, had a very high cost in terms of men and resources. The Roman army, worn out by years of continuous war and by the consequences of the plague that had decimated the ranks, was no longer the compact and overabundant one of the age of Trajan. Many departments had been hastily reconstituted, enlisting slaves, gladiators, provincials without military experience, and this had inevitably affected the overall quality of the troops. At the end of 177 AD, the legions are still standing, but they bear the signs of long wear and tear. The main problem that Marcus Aurelius inherits upon entering 178 is precisely this. The war can continue, but not indefinitely with the same men and the same means. The Danube frontier absorbs enormous quantities of money, grain, horses, equipment, and every winter spent in camps means sick soldiers, dead horses, supplies to be renewed. The imperial machine still works, but it creaks. Even on a political level, 177 had left open questions. Some barbarian leaders had accepted treaties with Rome, pledging to provide hostages or auxiliary contingents, but these agreements were fragile and often contested within the Germanic communities themselves. Rome knew well that any leader willing to negotiate risked being overthrown by more radical factions, ready to take up arms again as soon as the opportunity arose. In this context, peace is not a stable condition but an armed pause, an interval between two phases of combat. The experience of previous years had taught the Romans to never let their guard down. Another crucial element inherited from 177 is the now consolidated presence of Marcus Aurelius on the theater of operations. The emperor is no longer a distant figure who directs the war from Rome through letters and messengers. He is physically there, in the fields along the Danube, sharing the difficulties of military life. This has a profound effect on army morale. The sources insist on the respect that the soldiers have for him, a respect that does not arise from a display of strength but from coherence, discipline, the ability to endure the same deprivations as the men under his command. At the end of 177, Marcus Aurelius is aware that the war cannot be won with a single blow. What it can do is prevent it from being lost. Even the position of Commodus, son and designated heir, weighs like a shadow in the background. In 177 he had been formally associated with imperial power, but his military role remained marginal. The actual conduct of the war is in the hands of Marcus Aurelius and his generals, expert men, often of provincial origin, used to fighting on the border rather than shining in the salons of Rome. This creates a growing distance between the center of the empire and the front, a distance that the emperor tries to bridge by staying away from the capital. On a strategic level, The legacy of 177 is now a clear choice. Rome no longer limits itself to defending the border, but brings the war beyond the Danube when necessary. This decision, developed in previous years, involves enormous risks but responds to a precise logic. Hitting the enemy in his bases, breaking his ability to organize incursions, forcing him to negotiate from a position of weakness. However, every advance into barbarian territory exposes the army to ambushes, supply problems, and a hostile environment that the Romans did not know as well as their adversaries. At the end of 177, these operations produced mixed results, and the balance remains uncertain. When 178 AD begins, therefore, the Marcomannic War is no longer a sudden emergency but a war of attrition. The empire withstood the initial shock, recovered ground, but has not yet transformed the resistance into a definitive victory. It is with this awareness, gained in the field and paid for with blood, that Marcus Aurelius and the Roman army prepare to face a new year of operations. The recent past weighs on every decision, on every march, on every order given. The 178 was not born in a vacuum. It is the direct son of a difficult, unfinished 177, and therefore full of unresolved tensions. During 178 AD, the presence of Marcus Aurelius on the Danube front was not a symbolic detail, but the very fulcrum of the conduct of the war. The emperor does not limit himself to ratifying decisions made by others. He observes, listens, intervenes. The sources show him immersed in military daily life, surrounded by officers, messengers, interpreters, men who bring fragmentary news from a vast and difficult-to-control front. The imperial command in this year is exercised above all through continuity. Marcus Aurelius remains, he does not move, he does not delegate completely. In a conflict that has lasted for years, the stability of the leadership becomes a weapon as important as the